All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is our Matt and Minor in the morning session for today. We usually kick it off in the morning, but due to time conflicts and scheduling, we were lucky enough to get our guest on this afternoon. So our guest today is Dennis Todey of the Midwest Climate Hub. Dennis has been around weather meteorology for a long period of time, longer than we probably both care to admit, Dennis,
So
as
you're
I was in
saying I'm old, is that it?
I'm saying I was in college, just starting as a freshman when you were getting your probably your master's or your PhD at that time. I can't
PhD, yeah,
remember.
yeah, yeah.
So, yep. So perfect. So, Dennis, I'm glad you were able to take some time, carve some time out for us today. Weather is a big part of agriculture. You know that. And obviously, with what you're doing now, it's a huge part of it. Matt and I thought it was a good idea. We were talking and texting back and forth earlier this week, and we just wanted to, we thought it was a good time to maybe bring that up. We were headed for some pretty hot conditions here across the state of Iowa. We're in the middle or towards the end of pollination, so we know there can be some hiccups there. And my comment to Matt was, hey, what do you think about getting Dennis on to talk about weather and some of the things that are going on right now? Matt's like, bingo, that was it. So glad you were able to carve out some time for us. We just want to have a general conversation about weather here, Dennis, today. But if you could, right off the bat, maybe just give us a little background with yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I mean, it was interesting to that end. You brought up when you knew me first was I started off as a meteorologist. We were talking about that offhand about the math and things that get involved in meteorology. That's where I started from was to be a meteorologist. I got my undergrad at Iowa State and then jumped to get my master's out at South Dakota School of Mines in Rapid City. But the situation I was looking at there, I wasn't seeing things. I wanted to stay around the Midwest, so I decided to come back to Iowa State and get my PhD, and then stick an ag front end on this because obviously, what you're saying is there's a lot of interactions between weather and climate and agriculture issues. There's smaller scale in-field kinds of things about light interception and leaf area index and drift from chemicals and things like that, or there's larger scale things about what changes in weather and climate, or understanding how those are changing and the impacts on weather and agriculture. So that's the route I took, got my PhD, and then have been bouncing around doing that for I have almost 30 years now, almost 30 years. I was the state climatologist for South Dakota for 13 years. I was South Dakota State. And then 6 years ago, had the chance to come back to Ames and head the Midwest Climate Hub.
Awesome. You mentioned Midwest Climate Hub. So can you tell us, I've been to some of your sessions, whether it's at the ICM conference, love following you around and listening to your sessions. Can you tell us exactly what happens at the Midwest Climate Hub?
Sure. What we are one of 10 hubs nationally, and the role of the hubs is to help agriculture stay resilient, productive, whatever term you want to use, through changing climate. And that involves understanding near-term issues, what's happening, and how to deal with smaller and major issues, and then looking at longer term, what's happening over the longer term, and understanding how agriculture is going to deal with these changing issues. So we cover an 8-state area from Missouri to Michigan, over to Minnesota to Missouri, Michigan to Ohio. I know geography. I know I can. I know I can do this. So it's like an 8-state region. Basically, it's the Corn Belt, and then we kind of expand out into the Northern Plains to cover most of the Corn Belt. But that's not all. We cover row crops because that's a big issue. But like I mentioned earlier, there are different set of climate issues over in the Michigan, Ohio area. They have a lot of perennial crops, tree fruits. These warming winters are messing with them, so they're breaking dormancy early, and we're having frost freeze issues. So all times, and then you get throw livestock, then you get a whole other set of livestock issues that are related here. We have to try to deal with all these. And then briefly too, we share our region with the Northern Forest Hub, which is based out of Houghton, Michigan. I should mention we're based on campus at Iowa State, even though we are USDA. And so any of the forestry side, the Northern Forest Hub handles the forestry side of the house.
Sounds like a pretty easy job. I think you're going to do okay there.
We got it covered. We got it. We got it all.
You provide a lot of information to people, and I just got to say right off the bat, just props to you and the team at the Midwest Climate Hub. There's always something to learn when it comes to weather and crops there. So uh, the check is in the mail, whatever you need. But we certainly appreciate you being able to join us and talk a little weather today. Matt
Well,
Nelson, thank you for
this is your tax dollars at work right here. So.
all well worth it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Matt Nelson, thank you for joining us today, sir. We're just getting started with Dennis Todey from the Midwest Climate Hub. Matt, you and I mentioned to Dennis earlier, you and I were talking earlier this week, we were running through some pretty good streaks of warm temperatures. It was about 97 here yesterday, probably closer to 100 where you were at. One of the things you and I talked about, Matt, is just weather and crops in general. And Dennis, could you put some perspective on this? And Matt, please chime in if you would. But based on our current weather situation, where do you see us right now? A lot of people, everybody compares to last year, maybe the year before. But where do you see us weather-wise when it comes to where we're at right now in 2022 at this stage of the game versus maybe where we were last year?
It's really well, like most years, it's a where you are situation and what's going on at your location. Honestly, if you look at the NASS crop ratings that came out again, we're still not doing terribly across the whole Corn Belt, but we know there are some places that are really struggling. I'd heard comments that a couple weeks ago we'd lost some corn already down in Kentucky. Kentucky's not a major corn producing area, but we've lost some down there already. And then, we've had some areas that have received rainfalls. I was just, areas between Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, I was looking, I think they've had rain 3 straight days now. They're obviously doing something right there that they're getting rainfalls. We have had, some recent heat. Oddly enough, July as a whole was really close to average. It's really kind of strange. We have had some extreme heat, but then we had, latter part of the month, we had some cooler temperatures, which really was good for some of the tasseling corn. We do have some areas like in northwest Iowa that is ongoing dryness issues. We just can't get rid of that. And then I hear reports. I just talked with some extension folks this morning, and they mentioned Indiana and Ohio, and they got a few spots that aren't great, but they said, we're overall not too bad right now. Even Illinois said overall, and they've got a couple areas, not big, but are a little bit too wet because they've had too much rainfall. But those are really small areas.
Yeah, I can tell you, at least from my perspective, south of Cedar Rapids, west of Iowa City, it's been pretty dry for quite a while. We got 0.2 of an inch out of that, the rain that came through yesterday, 0.2 this morning, which I was hoping was going to be a lot more. But I think you said it perfectly earlier, take what you can get, say thank you, and just hope that more is on the way and that we make it. So, Dennis, related to like El Nino and La Nina, those names, those things come up a lot. Can you tell us maybe where we're at from that perspective? First of all, what is it? How does it impact our weather here in the Midwest? And maybe what's it looking like as far as those patterns are concerned?
Sure. I always love talking about this because we talked about my PhD earlier. I did part of my PhD was on El Nino, La Nina, so it's still useful. Yay!
Yes.
We're talking to the right person for this, Jim.
Yeah, absolutely. You bet.
Okay. The first thing we're talking when we're talking about these things, we're talking about sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean, especially along the equator in the Pacific. During El Nino, we get warmer in the eastern Pacific near South America, and we get colder near Southeast Asia. During La Nina, we just flip that. We get warmer over in Southeast Asia, and we get colder along South America. And the reason why these are big players is because they have some influence over what happens in our area. The influence is stronger in the winter, but there is some summer influence. Now, we don't want to say, oh, it's La Nina, here's exactly what it's going to be, because we can't say that. But during La Ninas, there is a tendency for more things to happen. And especially La Ninas during the summertime, there was a tendency for a better chance of warmer and drier conditions, particularly towards the plains. Iowa was kind of on that boundary. The eastern Corn Belt, the signal is not as strong, but there's a little bit of a hint towards hotter and drier in the plains. And that has kind of come to pass this year, that you really look at what's gone on. Hotter and drier conditions have been pervasive over the whole area, more concentrated out in the plains and parts of Iowa too. So we have had that as part of a player of what's going on this year. We've had the La Niña tends to be strongest in our winter time. And we've had two of these back to back, the last two winters. And it looks like right now, looking ahead to this winter, we could have a third one. So last year they were calling it a double dip La Niña. Is it a triple dip La Niña? Strawberry, chocolate? And just so it's a fairly rare thing, just so you know, since 1950, which is when we have the better data to track these, it's only happened 2 other times. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything different. It just means, our likelihood is to look at what happens with La Niña conditions when we get around to the wintertime.
What do you think that means for us? Does that mean should we be wearing shorts in December again, or does it signal anything?
La Niñas in the wintertime have a better chance of some colder, especially later in the winter, and maybe a bit more active pattern, but that's more to our north. Iowa's kind of in a boundary between that, so it's really not a good indicator, but especially as you go further north in the Midwest, you might want to look for a little bit colder and a little bit more active winter up in that area. Again, there's a lot of other things come into play rather than just La Niña, so it's not a guarantee by any stretch, but there's hints we could look out for it being a bit more that way.
Good information. Matt, do you have anything off the bat that you'd like to talk about?
No, I've got some questions just kind of about our
since he was late. Since he was late, does he get to ask any questions? I didn't think he did.
We'll allow it.
Sorry.
The only question that I had for you, Dennis, being late, we were out dodging rain. There was some rain in eastern Iowa. We were near the LaPorte City area. They got over an inch in about 10 minutes when that came through. So a really huge rain for that part of the state. But you go just west 50 miles and they didn't really get anything. I think in Iowa, looking at our weather with a lot of delayed planting, it seems like the last 3 or 4 years, we've had much, I don't know if it's unseasonably, but a lot more mild August and Septembers, and it seems like grain fills has extended. We've kept warmer temperatures later. We've gotten some timely moisture. With so much of the crop planted later in Iowa this year, do you think that type of, late summer is in the cards again for what we're looking at as you look at the, the 1 month outlook?
Sure. Where we're looking at right now is, the next week, 10 days or so, particularly for our part of the Midwest, good chance of above average temperatures overall, not hot every day, but, some warmth coming on. As we look ahead to, the middle part of August, more of that heat moves back out to the plains. So they still have a good chance of being warmer out there. But our chance of being warm starts to decrease. And in fact, the eastern Corn Belt by the mid to latter part of August has a better chance of being cooler than average. So that actually could be beneficial depending on where you're lining up in the way of corn to have a little bit cooler conditions for that, or at least not as warm conditions to be able to move that along. I don't think that's going to last prolonged. I think we'll stay warmer, but we have to remember what our averages are compared to that by the time you get to September, warmer than average still can be 80s to low 90s, which is not as bad for you as it is during tasseling standpoint. So I think we're going to continue to move along relatively quickly. There was delayed planting, and we've caught up somewhat. Like just looking at the NASS reports for Iowa for dough stage right now, Iowa is right on the 5-year average. It's really interesting. Michigan and Ohio are ahead of development. Actually, most everybody else is behind, but Iowa's right on for the 5-year average. I found it kind of interesting that we'd caught up some of that. And with the heat, I figured we would catch up some. So the progression is going to move along. I think we're going to be able to get through to maturity for a lot of crop before we have any kind of a frost or freeze potential. So we'll be in good shape there. The only downside is going to be in places around the state where we miss out on these rains and soil moisture starting to run out. We're going to see some premature death. I would expect we'll probably see some isolated spots where that happens, hopefully not very pervasive.
That was going to be a
Yeah.
question I had for you too, related to fall conditions, Dennis, would be frost impact. Do we see frost coming maybe just based on forecasts now? Does that look to be more in that normal time frame, or do we see anything that may trigger us to see something early or later, or are we about where we should be?
I mean, right now we can't say too much. So we go back to trends, and actually brings up a tool that we've rolled out, actually kind of new. We have a new tool working with our friends at the Midwest Regional Climate Center out of Purdue that you can see county by county how the frost and freeze dates have changed since 1950. And you could look at like 28, 32 and a bunch of different ones. So, basically what we're seeing throughout most of our area is that on the average, our frost and freeze dates are getting later as we go along. So our chances, again, with the heat likely pushing things through and the overall frost and freeze dates generally getting later, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape without any major issues. So
Yeah, I would agree with looking at Central Iowa where a lot of corn wasn't planted until very late May. In some cases, I looked at some this week that was early June planted in the Highway 141 area. Really not a ton of stress prior to pollination, which the stress at that point can kind of slow maturity. And getting the stress now, I do think for people who are worried about frost or how late this crop's going to black layer and start to dry down, I think we're speeding that process up quite a bit with the way that this weather's behaved here this week and what it looks like, for the next 10 days. I would agree with you, Dennis.
And we've got a tool we can share with people if they want to track how they're doing. When you're talking about growing degree days, it's really kind of hard to say because it depends on, what kind of variety did you plant, when did you plant it, that sort of thing. We actually have, I don't know if we can share that here or not real quickly.
You can give it a shot.
Okay, let's find out here and try to share this. And it's actually, you can search Midwest growing degree day tool. And here, if we can zoom that up. Okay, is that showing up good size for you there?
We can see it. I was hoping you were going to reference this. I thought this might be the one you were talking about, Dennis. Yep. I discovered this a few years ago, and it is awesome.
Yeah, it was something we developed when I was at South Dakota State. We were part of a regional project. What it allows you to do, and you can search Midwest Growing Degree Day tool, or you can just copy this link down below. And what it allows you to do is, it's not live, it's just an image, but you can put your Growing Degree Day start date up at the top. You can put your corn maturity, what kind of maturity you were using. And what this shows you, like in here, I picked Southeast Iowa, Mount Pleasant in this case. The purple line shows the average growing degree day accumulation since the planting date, and I put a planting date in of May 10 since there was a lot that happened around that time. The green line is where we are in growing degree day accumulation since then. So we've been ahead of accumulation since planting overall. Then the red line shows you where you probably hit tasseling. And then the black line is, if we just continue this out climatologically, this is when we hit black layer. So it's saying for this black layer, probably second week of September, something like that. And then the dashed lines around it are kind of a range of ahead or below, ahead or behind, depending on now. And then the blue lines over here are the freeze dates. So you can see even if we slow down our accumulation, our black layer probably hits black layer even before the last freeze date in the last 30 years. So that's why I'm pretty comfortable right now. When I was looking at some of the combinations of things after planting occurred the second week of May, if things were slow developing, we were looking well into freeze dates, which had some concerns, but we've really made progress all through the year. So, really fairly limited. The only things I'd be concerned about is if somebody had to replant or something like that. I don't think there'd be any major issues.
That's a great tool. I'm glad you showed that, Dennis. I know I've used that in the past. Depending on planting conditions in the spring, like you say, replant situations, that's a perfect tool that I recommend guys go to and put in all their information. It's pretty easy to use, very intuitive, and man, there's a lot of good information there. Really helps provide some sort of guidance versus just a guess as to whether or not you may or may not be into those frost or freeze conditions. So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Sure. The only thing I've been pointed out is if you are delayed planted, really delayed planted, some folks from Purdue have noted that corn will shorten its season a bit,
Mm-hmm.
not as much as soybeans does, but it does. We don't have the ability to do that, so you kind of have to do that intuitively. In a year like this, it should be fairly close, I would think, in the way of where it's putting.
Oh, that's good to know. Do we dare talk anything about winter or spring, or are we just too far out, Dennis?
No.
Weather is there. Enough said.
No, like I mentioned, at this point, looking ahead for winter, we would base it on there likely being a La Nina this winter. So that would increase our chances for colder up in the plains, a little bit more active winter up there. The southern U.S. has a better chance of being drier with a La Nina winter. So those places that are dry, like the southern plains, the Southwest, they have a good chance of that dryness continuing, which is not what they need this year. That's been the only, really good thing about this summer is if you've been watching, the Four Corners area that's had such severe drought, they have a monsoon that occurs. The monsoon has actually been very active this year, so it's not going to fix their situation, but it's at least helped their situation out, giving them more precipitation.
Interesting. Matt, you got any other questions for Dennis? There's so much good stuff we could ask.
I know. I could ask.
Here. Let me follow up one thing on next spring. I mean,
sure.
The only thing I would say about next spring is, what does La Nina do going into next spring? And
Perfect.
then what happens with fall precipitation? Right now, the outlooks are not optimistic towards a lot of fall precipitation. So I would bet we will probably go into next spring at least a little bit dry, if not a fair amount dry. A lot of things that can come into play, but I don't think right now I don't see us going into next spring really wet at this point.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered my question. I was going to ask about this next spring. I think that's been the trend. We were wet this spring in certain areas, but that's really the first time in several years we've had that much moisture around planting. I mean, you go back 2 years ago and there were people who were done planting, Dennis, by May 1st, completely done, because we had, we were very dry going into spring and we didn't get any of that moisture. So you kind of answered my question there. And I think that's been the recent trend. This year kind of changed the math a little bit, but in general, that's lent itself to a lot of beans being planted earlier. So
yeah.
That was the other question that I had of you, and you answered it for me.
That's great. Easy enough. Dennis, if people want to get in touch with you or the Midwest Climate Hub, what's the best way to do that? How can they reach out and contact with you? What kind of information do you provide? Can you provide for them?
Sure. Well, first thing, get in contact with us. You can do the old-fashioned way and email us. It's just dennis.todey, Todey, at USDA.gov. Real straightforward. You can reach me that way. If you Google USDA Midwest Climate Hub, you'll find us, and you can find out about all our whole staff, which we're gradually getting everybody back. I mentioned our coordinator's been out for the summer since she had a baby. Good for them. Bad for us. And some other folks coming on here too. If you do social media, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Dennis Todey on Twitter. And the things that we provide at this point, more pertinent to most people, is we do an ag outlook that we update every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how much time we get done, where we take the NOAA outlooks, we reference the NOAA and the Climate Prediction Center outlooks a lot and say, what did these mean for agriculture, and try to bring those down to be usable for people. So you can find those on our website. You can find a link to a monthly webinar that we do. If you like hearing about the kind of stuff that we do a monthly webinar with a bunch of our Midwest partners, Midwest and Plains partners. It's on the third Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. Central Time, because that's when the new monthly and seasonal outlooks are released. So that afternoon we do a webinar where we look at current conditions. We talk about how it's impacting ag, how it's impacting soil moisture. In the wintertime, we talk about water for the Missouri River, that sort of thing, and then talk about the outlooks and what it could mean going ahead. And people can ask questions so they can find out, hey, I heard about this, or can you explain this a little bit better? It's a pretty cool chance to be able to find out more. And you get to hear from a lot of different partners in the Midwest, different state climatologists. And I have another guy from NOAA, and I are on there all the time. He hosts it, and I'm there to answer the ag questions.
Fantastic. So there's plenty of ways to get a hold of you. There's plenty of good information out there. And I guess if anybody needs CCA credits, if they come to the ICM conference or some of the other sessions that are put on with you on there, there's a chance to get some CCA credits and to listen to you as well. So good information as always. I enjoy following you on Twitter, Dennis. You always put some good information out there, always relevant to what's going on in the Midwest. And we certainly appreciate you taking some time and spending some time with us today and providing some of that good information.
Always happy to do it. Anytime you want to do it, just give me a jingle.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis. Hopefully, maybe we'll have you back in the fall. We'll see how things go at harvest time, and we'll see if we can catch up.
Sounds good. You guys take care.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.